In a world where blood is the only currency, Nathaniel is a treasure Dante cannot afford to keep, and the only one he refuses to let go. I hope you're ready for a wild ride. If you enjoy this story and want to see more like it, make sure to like and subscribe to BL Story Vault. Without further ado, let's get straight into the video. The evergreen home for boys was a misnomer. There was nothing green about it, only the gray of weathered stone and the bruised purple of skin that hadn't healed quite right. Nathaniel Brooks had been there since he was 4 years old. He carried a single blurry memory of a woman's soft voice and the smell of vanilla, but that had long since been drowned out by the scent of mildew and fear. In the early years, Nathaniel had been hopeful. On visitation Saturdays, he would scrub his face until it glowed and sit on the edge of his cot, swinging his legs, waiting for a couple to look at him and see a son. But the couples who came to Evergreen were looking for alphas, strong, assertive boys who would carry on a family name or excel in sports. Nathaniel was too quiet. He was too delicate. As he crossed the threshold into puberty and his secondary gender began to manifest, the rejection became permanent. Once the medical exams confirmed he was an Omega, the adoption folders were tucked away. In an institution like Evergreen, Omegas weren't children to be loved. They were resources to be managed or outlets to be ignored. By age 10, Nathaniel stopped going to the parlor on Saturdays. By 12, he had learned to make himself invisible in the shadows of the library. He grew up watching the older alpha boys get adopted into prestigious families or recruited into specialized academies. No one wanted the tall, silent Omega who spent his nights staring at the stars through a barred window, wondering why the world had decided he was worth so little. He was 18 when the heat incident happened. The air in the dormitory was thick and suffocating. An Omega boy named Leo had collapsed in the hallway, his first heat hitting him with the force of a tidal wave. Nathaniel had rushed to help him, but the head caretaker, a burly alpha with a cruel smile, had stepped in the way. "Let him be, Brooks," the man had said, blowing smoke into Nathaniel's face. "The boy needs to learn his place. And the seniors, well, they've been working hard. They need a reward." Nathaniel watched, paralyzed, as they dragged Leo into a room and locked the door. He didn't just hear the screams. He felt them in his bones. For 3 days, the orphanage staff turned a blind eye while the senior alphas took turns. When it was over, and a hollow-eyed Leo tried to tell the visiting police officer what happened, the officer simply patted the caretaker on the back. "Boys will be boys," the officer had said. "Just a bit of biological tension. Keep 'em under control, will you?" That was the night Nathaniel realized that home was a lie. He didn't belong here, but he didn't belong to the world outside either. He belonged only to himself. He packed his meager life into a small bag. He didn't have much, a few books, a spare sweater, and the quiet, ironclad resolve of a man who had already seen the worst of humanity. He slipped through the laundry vent, the cold night air hitting his face like a slap of reality. He didn't look back. He didn't cry. He simply started walking. 8 years later, now 26, Nathaniel Brooks lived a life of rhythmic, beautiful boredom. He was a teacher at the Silvergate Primary School, a place of bright colors and sticky finger paints that felt like a sanctuary compared to the gray halls of his youth. To his students, he was Mr. Brooks, the man who could fix any broken toy and read stories with a voice like warm honey. To the parents, he was the reliable, soft-spoken caretaker who could be trusted with their most precious possessions. He had built a fortress of solitude. He lived in a neighborhood where no one asked about his past, and he kept his neck covered with high-collared shirts to hide the absence of a mating mark. Sometimes, while walking through the park, he'd see an Omega with a bright, jagged scar on their scent gland, a mark of protection from an alpha. He would feel a sharp, traitorous sting of jealousy, but he would quickly push it down. A mark is just another kind of leash, he'd tell himself. His life was governed by a single survival instinct. If you see danger to the right, move to the left. But on this particular Tuesday, the world refused to let him move left. The rain was a deluge, turning the city into a blurred watercolor of neon and shadow. Nathaniel had stayed late at a client's house, a wealthy couple who had lost track of time at a gala. By the time he left, the buses had stopped running. Drenched and shivering, he decided to take a shortcut through the industrial district to reach the subway. The streetlights flickered, struggling against the storm. As he rounded a corner near an old shipping warehouse, the wind shifted. The scent hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't the smell of rain or city grime. It was the overwhelming, intoxicating aroma of expensive tobacco, cedarwood, and raw, metallic blood. Nathaniel's heart hammered against his ribs. He stopped at the mouth of an alleyway. His rule screamed at him to run, but his feet felt like lead. In the flickering light of a dying neon sign, he saw them. 5 men in dark suits lay sprawled across the wet pavement, their bodies twisted in the finality of death. And in the center of the carnage, leaning heavily against a dented dumpster, was a man. He was a big shot. Anyone could see that. His suit was bespoke. His watch glinted with the cold light of diamonds, and even wounded, he possessed an aura of terrifying authority. This was Dante Vane, the man currently trying to drag the city's most violent syndicate into the civilized light of legitimate business. A move that had clearly earned him many enemies. Dante's hand was clamped over a jagged wound in his side, blood seeping through his expensive silk shirt. His head was bowed, his dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. Nathaniel's instinct to flee was at its peak. He turned to run, his boots splashing in a puddle. The sound made the Alpha's head snap up. Gray eyes, cold, lethal, and predatory, locked onto Nathaniel's. In that instant, the air between them seemed to ionize. A violent shiver raced down Nathaniel's spine, but it wasn't from the cold. His legs grew weak, his vision swam, and his own omega scent, usually suppressed and hidden, flared to life in a desperate, involuntary response. The weakening pheromones. Nathaniel's knees hit the wet asphalt. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He was trapped in the gravitational pull of a dying god. "Help!" the Alpha rasped, his voice a low, commanding vibration that bypassed Nathaniel's brain and went straight to his soul. "Help me." Nathaniel stared at the man, his breath coming in short, panicked hitches. Every survival instinct he had honed over 8 years of solitude shouted at him to get up and disappear into the rain. This man was a monster of a different caliber than the ones at the orphanage. This was a predator who ruled the very city Nathaniel hid in. But the weakening pheromones was a cruel master. Nathaniel's body felt heavy, his muscles turning to liquid as the Alpha's distressed pheromones flooded the narrow alley. It was a biological tether, dragging the Omega toward the source of the scent. I shouldn't," Nathaniel whispered, his voice trembling. Dante Vane's gray eyes tracked Nathaniel's every movement. Even as his life leaked onto the pavement, the Alpha's presence was suffocating. He watched the tall, handsome stranger struggle against the invisible pull. Dante had spent his life surrounded by sharks and soldiers. He had never seen anyone look at him with such pure, terrified empathy. "Please," Dante rasped again. It wasn't a command this time. It was a crack in the armor. Nathaniel's rule shattered. He crawled forward on his hands and knees through the freezing puddles until he reached the Alpha's side. The smell of blood was overwhelming close up, but beneath it was that intoxicating cedarwood scent that made Nathaniel's head swim. "I'm a teacher," Nathaniel stammered, his hands shaking as he reached for the Alpha's blood-soaked shirt. I know basic first aid, but you need a hospital. You're losing too much." "No hospitals," Dante grunted, his teeth bared in a grimace of pain as Nathaniel peeled back the fabric. "Too many eyes. My men, they're coming. Just stop the leaking." Nathaniel looked at the wound, a jagged tear from a blade or a grazing bullet. Without thinking, he pulled off his own thick scarf, the one he wore to hide his neck, and pressed it hard against Dante's side. The Alpha let out a sharp, hissed breath, his large hand instinctively flying up to catch Nathaniel's wrist. His grip was like a vice, even in his weakened state. For a moment, they stayed like that. The underworld's most dangerous man and the gentle schoolteacher, connected by a blood-stained scarf in the pouring rain. Dante's gaze dropped to Nathaniel's exposed neck. It was bare. No mark. No scent of another alpha. Just the sweet, terrified aroma of a pure omega. "Who are you?" Dante murmured, his thumb brushing against the racing pulse in Nathaniel's wrist. "Nobody," Nathaniel choked out, leaning into the pressure of the alpha's hand despite himself. "I'm nobody. Just hold the scarf. Please." In the distance, the muffled roar of high-performance engines began to tear through the sound of the storm. Black SUVs careened around the corner of the industrial block, their headlights cutting through the dark like searchlights. Nathaniel panicked. "Your men? Are they the ones who—" "Mine," Dante whispered, his eyes never leaving Nathaniel's face. He could feel his consciousness slipping, the blood loss finally catching up to him, but he used his last ounce of strength to pull Nathaniel closer. "Stay. Don't leave. I have to go. If they see me here." Nathaniel tried to pull away, but the weakening pheromones held him in a daze, and Dante's grip, though fading, was desperate. As the SUVs screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley and doors slammed open, he slipped away from Dante's grip into the shadows of the alleyway. He heard a voice from a distance. "Boss is hurt, check the perimeters." He didn't turn back, he just kept running. Nathaniel realized with a sinking heart that he had broken his only rule. He hadn't moved left. And now, the civilized life he had spent 8 years building was about to be swallowed by the shadows. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in denial. Nathaniel threw himself into his routine with a feverish intensity, arriving at Silvergate Primary earlier than usual and staying until the last crayon was tucked away. He told himself the heavy, magnetic pull in his chest was just lingering shock. He told himself the phantom scent of cedarwood and cold rain was just a trick of his memory. But biology is a ledger that cannot be balanced with lies. It started on a Tuesday morning during story hour. Nathaniel was sitting on the low wooden stool, a picture book open on his lap, when 6-year-old Sophie leaned in closer than usual. She didn't look at the colorful illustrations of the hungry caterpillar. Instead, she tilted her head, her small nose wrinkling as she sniffed the air around his shoulder. "Mr. Brooks?" she whispered, interrupting his narration. "Yes, Sophie?" Nathaniel asked, keeping his voice light and steady. "You smell like the big woods," she said, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity. "Like when my daddy takes us camping and the trees are all wet. It's a strong smell. Is it a new soap?" Nathaniel froze, the page half-turned. A few other children began to mimic her, leaning in, their sensitive, young senses picking up on the shift. I think it's just the rain outside. Sophie?" Nathaniel stammered, pulling his cardigan tighter around his frame. But as the day went on, the comments didn't stop. A fellow teacher lingered a second too long in the break room, her expression a mix of confusion and accidental submission. The children were uncharacteristically quiet around him, looking at him with a strange, wide-eyed reverence. He felt like a predator walking among lambs, even though he was the one who felt hunted. That evening, after the last child had been picked up, Nathaniel hurried to the staff restroom. He locked the door, his breath coming in shallow bursts. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror. His skin was flushed, his eyes brighter than they had ever been. With trembling fingers, he reached for the top button of his high-collared shirt. He pulled the fabric aside, exposing the pale, sensitive skin of his neck where his scent gland sat. His heart stopped. There was no physical bite, no jagged scar of a forced mating. But the skin over his gland was a deep, bruised rose color, glowing with a faint iridescent sheen that only appeared when an omega had been scent-marked by an alpha of overwhelming power. The realization hit him like a physical blow. That night in the alley, when Dante Vane had pressed his thumb against Nathaniel's pulse, he hadn't just been checking for life. In that moment of primal vulnerability, the alpha had flooded Nathaniel's system with a concentrated, possessive pheromone. It was a ghost mark. To the rest of the world, Nathaniel looked the same. But to any alpha, and even to the keen senses of children, he no longer smelled like an unclaimed nobody. He smelled like the personal property of the Vane Syndicate's king. The cedarwood scent wasn't in his head. It was coming from him. He was a lighthouse in the dark, broadcasting a signal to every predator in the city that he had been touched by the most dangerous one of them all. He had been trying to move left to avoid the danger, but the danger had already written its name under his skin. A heavy knock sounded on the restroom door, echoing like a gavel. "Mr. Brooks?" A deep, unfamiliar voice rumbled from the hallway. It wasn't the principal. It wasn't a parent. It was the same professional, cold tone he had heard in the alleyway 2 weeks ago. "We've been looking for you. The boss would like to thank you for the scarf. The boss doesn't like to be kept waiting, Mr. Brooks. It's a short drive. Please, don't make this difficult." The voice on the other side of the door said, polite but as unyielding as iron. Nathaniel realized then that his rule was officially dead. There was no moving left or right when the center of the world had decided to pull you in. He walked out of the school, his head low, and was ushered into a black sedan that smelled of leather and quiet power. When he was finally led into the penthouse office, the sheer scale of the room made him feel like he was stepping into another dimension. The walls were almost entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the city lights, and the air was filtered and cool. Standing by the window was the man from the alley. He was no longer a broken figure slumped against a dumpster. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing arms that looked like they were sculpted from marble. He turned, and for a moment, the air left the room. "Mr. Brooks," he said. His voice was a deep, velvet baritone that made the mark on Nathaniel's neck throb in a rhythmic, involuntary response. "Thank you for coming. I know the invitation was unconventional." Nathaniel stayed near the door, his hand instinctively flying to his collar. "You're him. You're really alive." The man walked forward, stopping just a few feet away. Up close, he didn't smell like blood and rain anymore. He smelled like expensive cedarwood and the crisp air of a mountain peak. "I am. My name is Dante Vane," he said, offering his name with the gravity of a formal contract. "I am the CEO of Vane Holdings. And as I'm sure you've realized by now, I am the man whose life you saved 2 weeks ago." Nathaniel's heart drummed against his ribs. "You shouldn't have brought me here, Mr. Vane. I'm just a teacher. I don't belong in a place like this." Dante's gray eyes softened, but they never lost their predatory focus. He looked at Nathaniel's hand, which was still clutching his shirt collar. "I brought you here because I owe you a confession," Dante said softly. "That night in the alley, I was fading. My instincts were frayed, and my inner alpha was clawing at the surface just to stay anchored to this world. In that delirium, I sensed you. I sensed your kindness, your warmth, and I reacted." He took a slow step closer, his presence overwhelming. "I scent-marked you, Nathaniel. I did it without your consent, while I wasn't in my right senses. For a man who prides himself on his civility and control, it was a lapse I find deeply regrettable. For the discomfort I've caused you at your workplace and in your private life, you have my sincerest apology." Nathaniel's fingers trembled. "The children, they look at me like I'm a stranger. If you're sorry, then please take it off. Let me go back to my life." Dante looked him directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. He reached out, his hand hovering near Nathaniel's jaw for a second before he let it drop, as if fighting the urge to touch the mark himself. "I can apologize for the lack of permission until the end of time," Dante murmured, his voice dropping to a low, intimate hum. "But I will not lie to you, Nathaniel. Standing here now, fully aware of what I've done, I cannot bring myself to regret it." Nathaniel's breath hitched. "How can you say that?" "Because that mark is the only reason I was able to find you again," Dante admitted, his voice laced with a quiet, undeniable possessiveness. "And because the thought of you walking through this city without the world knowing you are under my protection is a thought I can no longer endure. I've lived my life in the shadows, but for you, I'd like to bring everything into the light." Nathaniel recoiled as if the alpha's words had a physical weight, his back hitting the cool grain of the heavy mahogany door. He looked at Dante Vane, this polished, powerful man in his glass tower, as if he had suddenly grown horns. "You're crazy?" Nathaniel whispered, his voice cracking under the pressure of his heartbeat. "You don't even know me. You saw me for 5 minutes in a dark alley while you were half dead. You don't know my name, besides what your spies told you. You don't know my life, and you certainly don't have the right to protect me." Dante didn't flinch. He didn't even look offended. He simply watched Nathaniel with a terrifying, patient stillness, his gray eyes tracking the frantic rise and fall of the Omega's chest. "I know enough," Dante answered, his voice smooth and cold as silk. "You know nothing," Nathaniel snapped, his fear finally curdling into a desperate sort of anger. He thought of the orphanage, the years of hiding, the sheer effort it took to be a nobody in a city full of predators. "I am a person, not a project you can just decide to own because I happen to have a scarf and some bandages." Dante took a slow, deliberate step forward. He didn't move like a businessman. He moved like a man who was used to the floor belonging to him wherever he stepped. "I know that you stayed when any sane person would have run," Dante said, his voice dropping an octave. "I know that your hands were shaking, but they were steady enough to save me. And I know." He paused, his gaze dropping to the high collar of Nathaniel's shirt, his nostrils flaring slightly as he caught the scent of his own mark mingling with Nathaniel's sweet, natural aroma. "I know that you are unmarked." Nathaniel stiffened, his hand flying to his throat as if he could shield the skin from Dante's X-ray vision. That's not a reason. Being unmarked doesn't mean I'm waiting for a big shot like you to claim me. It means you are vulnerable," Dante countered, his tone turning dangerously protective. "In this city, an Omega as beautiful as you, with no Alpha's scent on him? It's dangerous." He leaned in, placing a hand on the door just above Nathaniel's head, effectively caging him in. The scent of cedarwood became an intoxicating wall. "I apologized for the mark," Dante murmured, his eyes locking onto Nathaniel's with a soul-piercing intensity. "But I told you I don't regret it. You're right. I don't know your favorite color or what you dream about at night, but I know the way your soul felt when it touched mine in that rain. And I am going to spend every day from here on out learning the rest." Nathaniel let out a sharp, breathless laugh, though it sounded more like a sob. "You found me? You claimed me. There's a difference." He tried to duck under Dante's arm, but the Alpha didn't budge. He stayed anchored like an ancient oak, his presence filling every inch of the air. Nathaniel looked up at him, his eyes shimmering with a mix of defiance and the exhaustion of 8 years of running. "You talk about monsters as if you aren't the biggest one in the room," Nathaniel choked out. "You think because you wear a $1,000 shirt and sit in a glass office that you're different from the Alphas at that orphanage? They thought they had the right to take whatever they wanted, too. They thought an unmarked Omega was just an invitation." Dante's expression shifted. The predatory satisfaction flickered, replaced by a sudden, razor-sharp stillness. The mention of the orphanage, a place Dante hadn't brought up, but clearly felt the weight of in Nathaniel's words, made the Alpha's eyes darken to the color of a stormy sea. "Do not compare me to them," Dante said, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating growl that sent a treacherous shiver down Nathaniel's spine. "They sought to break. I seek to keep." They saw a victim. I see the only person who looked at me without fear while I was at my worst. "I was afraid," Nathaniel shouted, his hands finally coming up to push against Dante's chest. His palms landed on the firm, warm muscle of the Alpha's chest, and he could feel the steady, powerful thrum of Dante's heart. "I'm terrified right now. You've ruined my life. I can't walk into my classroom without the kids sniffing the air like I'm a forest fire. I can't look in the mirror without seeing you on my skin." Dante didn't move back. Instead, he leaned down, his face inches from Nathaniel's, his breath warm against the Omega's cheek. "Then look at me," Dante commanded softly. "Don't look in the mirror. Look at the man who gave you that mark. I didn't do it because you were unmarked and available. I did it because in that alley, while the life was leaving me, your scent was the only thing that felt like home. I marked you because I couldn't bear the thought of waking up and not being able to find the person who saved me." He reached out, his fingers finally brushing against the edge of Nathaniel's collar. He didn't pull it away this time. You've spent your life hiding, Nathaniel. I can see it in the way you hold yourself, the way you try to disappear into your clothes. But you don't have to hide anymore. Not from the world, and certainly not from me. I am a man of my word. I apologized for the mark, but I will not take it back. I want the world to know that if they look at you, they are looking at me. Nathaniel's strength wavered. The weakening phenomenon was a cruel, beautiful trap. Being held this close to the source of the scent that was now part of his own biology made his head swim. He wanted to scream, to fight, to run. But a small, long-buried part of him, the part that had sat on a cot every Saturday for 14 years waiting for someone to choose him, felt a terrifying spark of warmth. I have a job, Nathaniel whispered, his voice losing its edge. I have a life. I have children who need me. And you will keep them? Dante promised, his thumb grazing Nathaniel's jawline with a tenderness that felt far more dangerous than his anger. But you will do it with my drivers at your door. You will do it with my name on your skin. I am a big shot, Nathaniel. I have everything. But I find I am suddenly very short on things that are real. And you are the most real thing I've ever touched. The drive back to Nathaniel's modest neighborhood was a surreal experience. The armored sedan felt like a bubble of hushed luxury drifting through the rain-slick streets that Nathaniel usually traversed on foot. Dante had been surprisingly and frustratingly persuasive during dinner. He hadn't used threats. He had used a quiet, steady logic that made Nathaniel's protests feel like paper walls. He had talked about repaying a debt and ensuring safety, all while keeping Nathaniel's glass filled and his plate full. As the car pulled up to the curb outside Nathaniel's cramped apartment building, the engine hummed with a low, expensive purr. Nathaniel felt a flutter of anxiety. This was the moment where he should walk away and never look back, but the weight of the ghost mark on his neck reminded him that the bridge had already been crossed. Dante turned in the plush leather seat, holding out a sleek, obsidian-black smartphone. Your number, Nathaniel, Dante said. It wasn't a question. It was a quiet expectation. Nathaniel hesitated, looking at the device as if it were a high-tech shackle. I don't think this is a good idea, Mr. Vane. Dante, the alpha corrected smoothly. He didn't move the phone. And it is an excellent idea. If you ever find yourself in another alley with a missed bus, I would prefer you call me rather than take your chances with the shadows. With a defeated sigh, Nathaniel took the phone and punched in his digits. He handed it back, his fingers accidentally brushing Dante's. The spark that jumped between them was instantaneous, making Nathaniel's breath hitch. There, Nathaniel whispered. Can I go now? One more thing, Dante murmured. He leaned across the console, invading Nathaniel's space with a slow, deliberate grace. Nathaniel pressed his back against the door, his eyes wide. He expected a kiss, or perhaps a demand, but Dante stopped just inches away. Dante closed his eyes for a second, and suddenly, the air in the car changed. The scent of cedarwood and mountain air intensified, but it wasn't the sharp, aggressive scent of a big-shot alpha. It was soft, warm, and incredibly soothing, the kind of pheromones an alpha used to calm a distressed mate. The tension in Nathaniel's shoulders melted away before he could stop it. The nagging, itchy feeling of the scent mark on his neck calmed into a pleasant, humming warmth. Your scent was becoming jagged, Dante whispered, his voice vibrating against Nathaniel's skin. The children at your school, they are sensing your anxiety, not just my mark. That's why they're quiet. If you carry a calm, settled scent, they'll feel safe again. He leaned even closer, his nose brushing against the sensitive skin of Nathaniel's marked gland, anointing him with a fresh, concentrated layer of his soothing pheromones. But, Dante added, his voice dropping to a low, silken hum that promised everything and nothing at once. Pheromones are biological. They fade. To keep the children, and your life at peace, will need to do this daily. A top-off, if you will. Nathaniel's head was swimming. The logic was perfect, yet he knew exactly what Dante was doing. The alpha was creating a biological necessity, turning himself into the medicine Nathaniel needed to survive his workday. Daily, Nathaniel breathed, his voice barely a whisper. Daily, Dante confirmed, pulling back just enough to look Nathaniel in the eye. A small, triumphant smirk played on his lips, the look of a man who had just closed the most important deal of his life. I'll have the car here at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Sleep well, Nathaniel. Nathaniel scrambled out of the car, his legs feeling like jelly. As he watched the red taillights of the sedan disappear into the night, he realized he was standing on the sidewalk of his quiet life, smelling like the most powerful man in the city and looking forward to tomorrow evening. He had tried to move left, but Dante Vane had simply moved the entire world to the right. The drive back to Nathaniel's modest neighborhood was a surreal experience. The armored sedan felt like a bubble of hushed luxury drifting through the rain-slicked streets that Nathaniel usually traversed on foot. Dante had been surprisingly and frustratingly persuasive during dinner. He hadn't used threats. He had used a quiet, steady logic that made Nathaniel's protests feel like paper walls. He had talked about repaying a debt and ensuring safety, all while keeping Nathaniel's glass filled and his plate full. As the car pulled up to the curb outside Nathaniel's cramped apartment building, the engine hummed with a low, expensive purr. Nathaniel felt a flutter of anxiety. This was the moment where he should walk away and never look back, but the weight of the ghost mark on his neck reminded him that the bridge had already been crossed. Dante turned in the plush leather seat, holding out a sleek, obsidian black smartphone. "Your number, Nathaniel," Dante said. It wasn't a question. It was a quiet expectation. Nathaniel hesitated, looking at the device as if it were a high-tech shackle. "I don't think this is a good idea, Mr. Vane." "Dante," the alpha corrected smoothly. He didn't move the phone. "And it is an excellent idea. If you ever find yourself in another alley with a missed bus, I would prefer you call me rather than take your chances with the shadows." With a defeated sigh, Nathaniel took the phone and punched in his digits. He handed it back, his fingers accidentally brushing Dante's. The spark that jumped between them was instantaneous, making Nathaniel's breath hitch. "There," Nathaniel whispered. "Can I go now?" "One more thing," Dante murmured. He leaned across the console, invading Nathaniel's space with a slow, deliberate grace. Nathaniel pressed his back against the door, his eyes wide. He expected a kiss, or perhaps a demand, but Dante stopped just inches away. Dante closed his eyes for a second, and suddenly, the air in the car changed. The scent of cedarwood and mountain air intensified, but it wasn't the sharp, aggressive scent of a big-shot alpha. It was soft, warm, and incredibly soothing, the kind of pheromones an alpha used to calm a distressed mate. The tension in Nathaniel's shoulders melted away before he could stop it. The nagging, itchy feeling of the scent mark on his neck calmed into a pleasant, humming warmth. "Your scent was becoming jagged," Dante whispered, his voice vibrating against Nathaniel's skin. "The children at your school, they are sensing your anxiety, not just my mark. That's why they're quiet. If you carry a calm, settled scent, they'll feel safe again." He leaned even closer, his nose brushing against the sensitive skin of Nathaniel's marked gland, anointing him with a fresh, concentrated layer of his soothing pheromones. "But," Dante added, his voice dropping to a low, silken hum that promised everything and nothing at once, "pheromones are biological. They fade. To keep the children and your life at peace, we'll need to do this daily. A top-off, if you will." Nathaniel's head was swimming. The logic was perfect, yet he knew exactly what Dante was doing. The alpha was creating a biological necessity, turning himself into the medicine Nathaniel needed to survive his workday. Daily, Nathaniel breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "Daily," Dante confirmed, pulling back just enough to look Nathaniel in the eye. A small, triumphant smirk played on his lips, the look of a man who had just closed the most important deal of his life. "I'll have the car here at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Sleep well, Nathaniel." Nathaniel scrambled out of the car, his legs feeling like jelly. As he watched the red taillights of the sedan disappear into the night, he realized he was standing on the sidewalk of his quiet life, smelling like the most powerful man in the city and looking forward to tomorrow evening. He had tried to move left, but Dante Vane had simply moved the entire world to the right. The next morning, the daycare center was bathed in the soft, golden light of a calm spring day. But for Nathaniel, it felt like he was walking through a dream. As he stepped through the front doors, he waited for the familiar spike of anxiety, the instinct to shrink his shoulders and hide. But it never came. The top-off Dante had given him in the car worked with terrifying efficiency. Instead of the jagged, metallic scent of fear he'd been projecting for 2 weeks, Nathaniel was now draped in a rich, mellow aura of cedarwood and grounded strength. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," Mrs. Gable, the school secretary, called out as he passed the front desk. She paused, her pen hovering over her ledger, and inhaled deeply. Her expression, usually pinched with the stress of morning paperwork, visibly smoothed out. "My goodness, you look rested. Whatever tea you're drinking, I need the name of it." Nathaniel offered a shy smile, his hand ghosting over his high collar. "Just getting more sleep, I suppose." When he entered his classroom, the effect was even more profound. Usually, the morning rush was a chaotic symphony of crying toddlers and crashing blocks. But as Nathaniel sat down on the rug for circle time, a strange hush fell over the room. 6-year-old Sophie, the one who had first pointed out his woodsy smell, didn't hesitate this time. She ran over and plopped herself directly into his lap, leaning her head against his chest with a heavy sigh of contentment. "You smell like the sun on the trees today, Mr. Brooks," she murmured, already reaching for a picture book. One by one, the other children gravitated toward him. They weren't looking at him with wide-eyed reverence or fear anymore. They were drawn to him like magnets to a pole. The heavy, protective pheromones Dante had laced into his skin acted like an invisible security blanket for the children's sensitive systems. They were calmer, more focused, and unusually affectionate. By lunchtime, Nathaniel felt a complicated knot forming in his stomach. On one hand, his day was the most peaceful it had been in years. The children were thriving, and the heavy weight of his own trauma seemed muffled by the scent of the man who had claimed him. On the other hand, he knew exactly what this was: dependency. Every time a child hugged him or a colleague smiled at him, he was reminded that he was wearing Dante Vane's peace like a borrowed coat. He was no longer just Nathaniel Brooks, the independent teacher who had escaped the orphanage. He was a man being sustained by a mafia bigshot's biological tether. As 3 p.m. approached, Nathaniel found himself glancing at the clock more often than he cared to admit. His skin was starting to feel a bit cooler, the humming warmth of the pheromones beginning to thin out as the day wore on. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was the obsidian black device Dante had given him. "Dante Vane, my driver is 5 minutes away. I hope the children were kind to you today, Nathaniel." ***. Nathaniel stared at the screen. He should be angry. He should be planning another escape. But as he looked at the children napping peacefully on their mats, calmed by the lingering scent of a predator who had decided to be a protector, Nathaniel realized he was already counting down the seconds until he was back in that car. He wasn't moving left anymore. He was waiting for the door to be opened for him. When the final bell rang, Nathaniel felt a strange, frantic buzzing beneath his skin. The peace Dante had gifted him was retreating, leaving behind the raw, cold edges of his own nerves. It was like a fever breaking. He was shivering in the sudden absence of that manufactured warmth. He walked out of the school gates, and there it was. The black sedan sat like a sleek, obsidian shark in the loading zone. Before Nathaniel could even reach for the handle, the door swung open, and the scent of cedarwood hit him with the force of a physical embrace. He slid inside, the door closing with a heavy, pressurized thud that cut off the sounds of the city. Dante was sitting in the back, his laptop glowing on his thighs, his sleeves rolled up as if he'd been working through a mountain of civilized spreadsheets. He didn't look up immediately, but the air in the car was already beginning to thicken. "You're late by 2 minutes, Nathaniel," Dante murmured, his voice a low vibration that seemed to settle right in the hollow of Nathaniel's throat. "The children didn't want to let go," Nathaniel said. his voice sounding breathless even to his own ears. He sat as far away as the leather bench allowed, but his body was betraying him, leaning instinctively toward the alpha. It worked. The school was quiet. Too quiet. Dante closed his laptop and set it aside, finally turning his full attention to the Omega. His gray eyes were dark, tracking the way Nathaniel was trembling. "Is that a complaint?" Dante asked softly. "It's a warning," Nathaniel whispered. "To myself. I know what you're doing, Dante. You're making me need this. You're making me need you just to do my job." Dante didn't deny it. Instead, he moved, a slow, liquid shift across the seat until he was towering over Nathaniel. He reached out, his large, warm hand cupping the back of Nathaniel's neck, his thumb brushing over the rose-colored mark. "I am a businessman, Nathaniel," Dante rasped, leaning in until their foreheads touched. "I provide solutions to problems. Your problem was the world sensing your fear. My solution is me." He didn't wait for a rebuttal. Dante tilted Nathaniel's head back and buried his face in the crook of Nathaniel's neck. He didn't bite. He simply inhaled deeply, his hot breath ghosting over the scent gland, before releasing a heavy, concentrated wave of pheromones. Nathaniel's eyes fluttered shut. His toes curled inside his shoes as the top-off hit his system. The chill in his bones evaporated, replaced by a golden, honey-like warmth that made his brain feel fuzzy and safe. It was better than any drug, more addictive than any comfort he'd known in the orphanage. "There," Dante whispered against his skin, his lips lingering just a second too long on the mark. "Better." "Yes," Nathaniel breathed, his hands involuntarily clutching the fabric of Dante's expensive shirt. "Good." Dante pulled back just enough to look at him, his thumb tracing Nathaniel's lower lip. "Because I've decided that a car is a poor place for our daily meetings. Starting tomorrow, my driver will take you to my home after school. If I am to provide you with peace, I'd prefer to do it while you're fed a proper dinner." "Dante." "It's not a request, Nathaniel," Dante said, his voice regaining that big-shot edge of absolute authority, though his eyes remained strangely soft. "The world is starting to realize you belong to the vain name. And the vain name doesn't leave its treasures in a cramped studio apartment alone at night." Nathaniel's eyes snapped open, the haze of pheromones momentarily clearing as a cold splash of reality hit him. He pushed against Dante's chest, creating a few inches of desperate space between them. "No," Nathaniel said, his voice firmer this time. "The car, the scent, I can't stop you from doing those things, apparently. But I am not moving into your house. I won't be a bird in a gilded cage, Dante. I work too hard to have a door that I, and only I, hold the key to." Dante's jaw tightened, a flash of the Ghost King flickering in his eyes. He wasn't used to being told no, especially by someone he was currently keeping upright with his own scent. "It's about your safety, Nathaniel. My home is the only place in this city." "Safety," Nathaniel interrupted, a sudden, sharp thought cutting through his mind. He looked at Dante, really looked at him, at the sheer power he radiated and the clinical perfection of his civilized life. "I've been so caught up in what you're doing to me that I forgot to ask the most obvious question." Nathaniel's gaze dropped to Dante's side, where the wound had been. "How did you end up there, Dante? In that alley? You're a big shot. You have armored cars and a small army in slate gray suits. Men like you don't just stumble into a massacre near a dumpster." The air in the car turned heavy, the soothing pheromones replaced by a sudden, metallic tension. Dante went still, the kind of stillness a predator adopts right before it strikes or flees. He pulled back, settling into the leather seat, the shadows of the passing streetlights dancing across his sharp features. He hesitated. For a man who seemed to have an answer for everything, the silence was deafening. "It was an internal matter," Dante finally said, his voice clipped. "Internal," Nathaniel challenged. 5 dead men in tactical gear is not a matter, Dante. That's a war." Dante looked out the window for a long moment before turning back to Nathaniel. His expression was grimmer than Nathaniel had ever seen it. I told you I am moving Vane Holdings into legitimate industries. I am cutting the ties to the old ways, the smuggling, the protection rackets, the blood. But the syndicate isn't just a company, Nathaniel. It's a family of vipers. And many of those vipers believe that a civilized Dante Vane is a weak Dante Vane. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Nathaniel's. The men in that alley weren't rivals from another city. They were my own elite guard. They were sent to ensure that my transition to the clean world never happened. They wanted to replace me with someone who wouldn't stop the spilling of blood. Nathaniel felt the blood drain from his face. The weakening phenomenon, the scent marking, the top-offs. It wasn't just about a powerful man's obsession. "You're in the middle of a coup," Nathaniel whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "And by marking me, by bringing me into your car every day, you haven't just protected me from the world. You've put me right in the center of the target." Dante didn't deny it. The truth hung between them, cold and jagged. "I thought I could keep the two worlds separate," Dante admitted, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I thought if I gave you my scent, they would stay away out of fear. But you're right, Nathaniel. This is a war for the soul of the Vane name. And the Vipers now know that the Ghost King has a heartbeat after all." Nathaniel looked at his hands, which were still trembling. He had spent 8 years running from the monsters of his past, only to walk straight into the arms of a king whose own crown was being melted down for bullets. "You didn't just find me, Dante," Nathaniel said, a tear finally escaping and rolling down his cheek. "You drafted me." Dante reached out, his hand hovering before he finally took Nathaniel's trembling fingers in his. His grip wasn't a shackle this time. It was an anchor. "1 month," Dante said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, urgent whisper that cut through Nathaniel's rising panic. "Give me just 1 month. I wouldn't have brought you into my space, Nathaniel, if I hadn't already made it the safest square inch in this city. I know how it looks. I know what I've forced on you." He leaned in, his gray eyes burning with a raw honesty that stripped away the civilized CEO persona. "I'll be honest with you, before that night in the alley, I was wavering. I was contemplating staying in the dirt. I thought perhaps the Vane name was destined to stay stained with blood. I was ready to leave this civilized dream behind and go back to being the monster they wanted me to be." He squeezed Nathaniel's hand, his thumb brushing over his knuckles. "But then I met you, and I realized that if I stay in the shadows, I can never truly walk beside you. To show the newcomers, the ones who think I've grown soft, that I am still the man who was born and raised in the belly of the syndicate, I have to finish this. I know every vein of the underground, every rat run and every dirty secret. I am the only one who can tear it down properly." Nathaniel looked at him, his heart aching. "And what happens during that month, Dante? Do I just wait for the next set of tactical boots to come for me?" "No," Dante vowed. "For this month you stay under my shadow, not as a prisoner but as my priority. I will finish this purge. I will show them that my civility isn't a sign of weakness. It's a choice made by a man who is too powerful to be challenged." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against Nathaniel's. "I draft you into this because you are the reason I want to win. If I can't protect one gentle soul who saved me when I was nothing, then I don't deserve the Vane name. 1 month. If I haven't cleared the path by then, I will let you go. I will scrub my scent from your skin myself and let you disappear." Nathaniel looked into Dante's eyes and saw the Ghost King, the man who knew the underground better than he knew himself. He saw the predator who was currently using all his strength to be a protector. "You're asking me to trust the most dangerous man in the city," Nathaniel whispered. "I'm asking you to trust the man you chose not to leave in the rain," Dante corrected softly. The silence in the car was thick, the soft pheromones Dante released acting like a sedative on Nathaniel's fear. The war was real, the danger was imminent, but as Dante's scent wrapped around him, Nathaniel felt a terrifying sense of belonging he had never known. 1 month, Nathaniel finally whispered, the words feeling like a pact. "But if I see a gun, Dante, if I see the blood again, I'm gone. You won't see a thing." Dante promised, his voice a lethal, protective hum. "I'll handle the shadows. You just keep being the light." Nathaniel stood his ground. Despite the magnetic pull of Dante's presence and the terrifying logic of the coup, he refused to abandon the small studio apartment that represented his hard-won independence. "I won't move into your estate, Dante," Nathaniel said, his voice quiet but unshakable. "If I go there, I'm just an omega in a cage. My apartment is the only thing that belongs to me. I need to know I still have a life that isn't yours." Dante's jaw tightened, his gray eyes flashing with the urge to simply command Nathaniel into the car. But he saw the flicker of the boy from the orphanage in Nathaniel's eyes, the one who had nothing, and he realized that forcing him would be the quickest way to lose him. "Fine," Dante rasped, "but the shadows around your building will be mine. You won't see them and they won't interfere with your life, but they will be there. To the rest of the world, your street is now the most dangerous place to commit a crime." 1 week later, the quiet siege. A week had passed, and the 1-month pact had settled into a rhythm that was as beautiful as it was frightening. Every morning, Nathaniel would leave his apartment and walk to school. He never saw the guards Dante promised, but he felt them. He noticed how the shifty figures who used to loiter on his corner had vanished. He noticed the black SUV that always seemed to be parked 2 blocks away, moving only when he moved. It was a silent, invisible shield that allowed him to breathe for the first time in years. But it was the evenings that were the true danger. The daily top-off in the back of the sedan had evolved. It was no longer just a biological necessity. It had become a sanctuary. Dante would pick him up after school, and for 1 hour the world of the syndicate and the world of the classroom would vanish. One evening, the rain was tapping a gentle rhythm against the sunroof. Dante wasn't working on his laptop. He was sitting close, his arm draped across the back of the seat, his fingers idly playing with the ends of Nathaniel's hair. "You look tired today, Nathaniel," Dante murmured. "It was finger-painting day," Nathaniel replied with a weary smile, leaning his head back. "So, Sophie decided the walls needed to be blue." Dante let out a low, rare chuckle, a sound that made Nathaniel's heart skip a beat. "I'll send a crew to repaint the school this weekend. Whatever color you want." "You can't just fix everything with money and power, Dante," Nathaniel teased softly, though he was surprised by his own boldness. "Can't I?" Dante's hand migrated from Nathaniel's hair to his cheek. His thumb traced the line of Nathaniel's jaw with agonizing slowness. "I spent my life in the syndicate learning that power is the only thing that matters. But this week, I'm learning that there are things power can't touch. Like the way you look when you're talking about those children." He leaned in, and this time, the pheromones weren't just for peace. They were warm, sweet, and laced with a deep, aching affection. Nathaniel's heart betrayed him then. It didn't just beat. It thrummed with a longing so sharp it brought tears to his eyes. All his life he had been a nobody. He had been the boy no one adopted, the teacher no one protected, the omega who had to hide his very nature to survive. He had never known this kind of care. Dante didn't just mark him, he asked about his day. He didn't just protect him, he listened to his stories. He provided a safety that Nathaniel had spent 26 years trying to build on his own, only to realize he had been exhausted all along. Nathaniel found himself leaning into Dante's touch, his eyes fluttering shut. "I shouldn't like this," he whispered. "I shouldn't like you." "I know," Dante breathed, his lips ghosting over Nathaniel's forehead. "But you do, and I will spend the next 3 weeks making sure you never want to leave it." As Nathaniel stepped out of the car that night, the scent of cedarwood was so deeply embedded in his skin that it felt like his own. He climbed the stairs to his lonely apartment, but for the first time, it felt empty rather than safe. His heart was no longer in his own chest. It was sitting in the back of a black sedan, wrapped in the protective shadow of a man who was at war with the world, just to keep one teacher smiling. The following Tuesday, the 1-month pact faced its first true test of the mundane. Nathaniel was standing in the school's small staff kitchen, heating up soup, when he realized he was humming. It was a soft, low melody, One Dante had played on the car's sound system the night before. He stopped abruptly, the plastic spoon midair. He was becoming comfortable. He was becoming accustomed. "Mr. Brooks." Nathaniel jumped, nearly splashing soup on his sweater. It was Mrs. Gable. She was leaning against the doorframe, watching him with an unreadable expression. "You've changed, Nathaniel," she said, her voice unusually soft for the normally brisk secretary. "I've worked with you for 3 years. You used to walk like you were trying to take up as little space as possible. Like you were a guest in your own life." Nathaniel gripped the edge of the counter. "I'm just feeling better, Mrs. Gable." "No," she said, stepping closer, her eyes twinkling with a bit of older Omega intuition. "You walk like someone who knows exactly who is standing behind him. It's a good look on you. You're glowing." He flushed a deep crimson, fleeing back to his classroom before she could say more. He wasn't just glowing, he was saturated. Every time he looked in the mirror, the rose-colored mark on his neck seemed deeper, more vibrant, as if it were drinking in the daily top-offs Dante provided. That evening, the car was waiting exactly where it always was. But when Nathaniel slid inside, the atmosphere was different. Dante wasn't in his usual seat. He was leaning back, his eyes closed, his face pale in the dim light of the cabin. "Dante?" Nathaniel asked, the old fear sparking in his chest. "Are you hurt?" Dante opened his eyes slowly. They were bloodshot, the weight of the invisible war he was fighting finally showing in the tension of his jaw. "Just a long day of cutting out rot, Nathaniel. Sit." Nathaniel didn't sit on the far side of the seat. Without thinking, he moved closer, his hand reaching out to touch Dante's forehead. The alpha flinched instinctively before melting into the touch, letting out a ragged sigh that sounded like a confession. "You're burning up," Nathaniel whispered. "You're pushing yourself too hard." "I have 2 weeks left to give you the world I promised," Dante rasped, his hand coming up to cover Nathaniel's, pressing the Omega's palm firmly against his cheek. "I don't have time to be tired." "You have time for dinner," Nathaniel countered, his heart performing that treacherous somersault again. "And you have time to breathe." Dante looked at him then, and for the first time, Nathaniel didn't see the Ghost King or the big shot. He saw a man who had been raised in a world of vipers, a man who had never been allowed to be weak until a schoolteacher with a yellow raincoat found him in the mud. Dante pulled Nathaniel closer, tucking the Omega's head under his chin. He didn't release the pheromones immediately. Instead, he just held him, his heart beating a steady, heavy rhythm against Nathaniel's ear. "This," Dante murmured into Nathaniel's hair, "this is the only part of the day that feels real. The rest is just noise. The rest is just cleaning the cage." Nathaniel closed his eyes, his arms winding around Dante's waist. His heart was screaming at him that this was dangerous, that loving a man at war was a special kind of suicide. But as he breathed in the scent of cedar and the warmth of the man who had turned the city into a fortress for him, Nathaniel realized he didn't want to move left or right anymore. He just wanted to stay exactly where he was. 1 month, Nathaniel reminded him softly, his voice muffled by Dante's shirt. 1 month, Dante promised, his grip tightening just a fraction. "And then, Nathaniel, I'm going to take you to a place where the only thing you have to hide is how much I've spoiled you." The final 2 weeks of the 1-month pact felt like the tension before a summer storm. The city's air was heavy, and even within the bubble of the sedan, Nathaniel could sense the gears of Dante's world grinding toward a crescendo. Dante had become increasingly quiet. During their daily meetings, he would often just hold Nathaniel's hand, his thumb tracing the blue veins of his wrist, as if anchoring himself to a reality that wasn't made of betrayal and spreadsheets. The top-offs were longer now, more lingering, as if Dante were trying to memorize Nathaniel's skin in case the shadows finally won. On a Thursday evening, as the car crawled through the neon-lit downtown, Nathaniel noticed a smudge of dark ink on Dante's cuff. He reached out to brush it away, only to realize it wasn't ink. It was dried blood. Nathaniel's breath hitched. He didn't pull away, but he looked up at Dante with wide, searching eyes. You said I wouldn't see it. Dante looked down at his sleeve, his expression flickering with a momentary lapse in his ironclad composure. He sighed, leaning his head back against the leather. The vipers are cornered, Nathaniel. When you corner a snake, it doesn't matter how civilized you try to be. They strike one last time before they die. Is it almost over? Nathaniel whispered. Tomorrow night, Dante said. Tomorrow, the board of Vane Holdings meets to finalize the transition. The old guard. They won't have a seat at the table anymore. After tomorrow, the Ghost King is dead. Only Dante Vane remains. He turned to Nathaniel, his hand coming up to cup the Omega's face. The month is up tomorrow, Nathaniel. I am a man of my word. Once the sun rises on Saturday, you are free. I will remove the scent. I will pull the guards. You can go back to being a nobody, if that's what you still want. Nathaniel felt a cold hollow open up in his chest. Freedom. It was what he had prayed for in the orphanage, what he had fought for in his studio apartment. But now, the thought of his quiet life felt like a sentence of silence. And what if I don't want to be a nobody? Nathaniel asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of the tires. Dante's eyes flared, a primal, hungry silver light igniting in them. He leaned in, his nose brushing Nathaniel's. Then you stay, not because you're marked, not because you're drafted, but because you want to see what a monster looks like when he finally becomes a man. The car stopped in front of Nathaniel's apartment. For the first time, Dante didn't wait for the driver. He opened the door himself and walked Nathaniel to the entrance of the building. The guards in the shadows seemed to vibrate with awareness, a silent perimeter of steel. At the door, Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it. He simply pressed it into Nathaniel's palm. Don't open it until tomorrow night, Dante murmured. If you hear the news that everything is settled, if you decide you want to keep the scent, come to the Vane Tower. If not, keep it as a reminder that for 1 month, you were the only thing that mattered to the most dangerous man in the world. Dante leaned down, kissing the rose-colored mark on Nathaniel's neck one last time. It wasn't a top-off. It was a goodbye or a beginning. Nathaniel watched the sedan pull away, the velvet box heavy in his hand. He went up to his apartment, but he didn't turn on the lights. He sat by the window, looking out at the city he had once been so afraid of, and realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking for a way to move left or right. He was waiting for the morning. Friday arrived with a tension that made the air in the classroom feel like glass about to shatter. Nathaniel went through the motions of his lessons, but his soul was miles away, hovering over a boardroom in a skyscraper. Every time the school's front door opened, he flinched, expecting the vipers Dante had warned him about. But the day passed in an eerie, protected silence. The children were uncommonly gentle, as if sensing their teacher's heart was elsewhere. When the final bell rang, Nathaniel didn't head for the loading zone. Dante had told him the car wouldn't come today. The Alpha was busy, burning the old world down. Instead, Nathaniel walked home alone, his fingers nervously tracing the velvet box in his pocket. He felt exposed without the armored sedan, but the subtle rustle of a jacket behind a brick wall and the slow crawl of a familiar black SUV a block away told him he was still the most guarded person in the city. He sat in his dark apartment, the hours stretching like a slow-motion nightmare. He didn't turn on the television. He just watched the Vane Tower in the distance. At 9 p.m., the city's news cycles erupted. Massive shakeup at Vane Holdings. Board members arrested in corruption sting. The headlines read, CEO Dante Vane consolidates power, announces complete shift to clean energy and technology. There was no mention of the alley, the blood, or the vipers. Dante had done it. He had moved the mountain. Nathaniel's hands shook as he finally opened the velvet box. Inside wasn't a ring or a diamond. It was a key, made of solid silver, and a small glass vial of concentrated cedarwood oil, hand-blended to match Dante's natural scent perfectly. Underneath was a handwritten note. The scent is yours to keep or discard. The key is to the penthouse. I am no longer a monster, Nathaniel. but I am still a man who is waiting for his home." Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He didn't move left. He didn't run away. He took a cab to the Vane Tower. The security guards at the entrance, men who usually looked like stone statues, bowed their heads the moment he approached. They didn't ask for ID. They simply smelled the air and stepped aside. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like an ascent to another life. When the doors opened, the office was dim, lit only by the sprawling glow of the city below. Dante was standing by the window, his back to the door. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a mess, and he looked like a man who had just survived a war. "You came," Dante said, his voice a low, rough rasp as he turned. Nathaniel didn't speak. He walked across the vast marble floor, his heart echoing in the silence, until he was standing directly in front of the Alpha. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his own shirt, exposing the rose-colored mark. "The month is over," Nathaniel whispered. Dante's eyes were dark with an agonizing restraint. "It is. Do you want me to take it back? The guards, the scent, the man?" Nathaniel looked at the silver key in his hand, then up at the man who had turned his world upside down just to keep him safe. He realized then that the care Dante had shown him wasn't a cage. It was the foundation he had been missing his entire life. "No," Nathaniel said, leaning forward until his chest pressed against Dante's. "I want you to top it off." Dante let out a sound that was half growl, half sob, and pulled Nathaniel into a crushing embrace. He buried his face in Nathaniel's neck, his scent flooding the room. No longer just a ghost mark, but a promise. The rule was gone. Nathaniel wasn't a nobody anymore. He was the heart of a king, and for the first time since the orphanage, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Dante's restraint snapped like a frayed cable. The high-tension silence of the penthouse shattered as he lunged into Nathaniel's space, his large hands framing Nathaniel's face with a desperate, trembling intensity. He didn't just smell the Omega. He devoured the air around him, his own alpha scent exploding into a thick, intoxicating cloud of dark cedar and rain-soaked earth. "You have no idea," Dante growled against Nathaniel's skin, "how long I've waited for you to say that." He swept Nathaniel up, his strength effortless, and carried him toward the sprawling leather sofa that overlooked the skyline he had just conquered. He laid Nathaniel down among the soft cushions, the contrast between the teacher's pale, gentle frame and the dark, expensive leather stark and beautiful. Dante didn't waste time with the finery of his civilized persona. He moved with the primal urgency of the boy who had survived the syndicate's trenches. His hands were everywhere, unbuttoning Nathaniel's shirt with frantic fingers, pulling the fabric away to reveal the trembling skin beneath. When his eyes landed on the rose-colored scent mark on Nathaniel's neck, a low, guttural purr vibrated in his chest. "Mine," Dante rasped. "I'm making it permanent tonight." He lowered his head, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin of the gland. Nathaniel let out a sharp, jagged gasp, his head lolling back as the first wave of pure alpha pheromones hit his system. It wasn't a top-off anymore. It was a flood. Nathaniel's eyes welled with silent, overwhelming tears. Tears of release, of terror, and of a profound, soul-deep relief. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to be the one holding himself together. Dante's tongue swiped over the mark before he finally sank his teeth in. It wasn't a shallow nip. It was a deep, possessive claim. Nathaniel's body arched, a silent cry dying in his throat as the sharp sting of the bite sent a jolt of lightning through his nerves. The bond snapped into place, heavy and golden, tethering Nathaniel's soul to the man above him. As the pain faded into a searing, addictive heat, Dante moved down. He stripped away the rest of Nathaniel's clothes, his eyes devouring every inch of the Omega he had guarded from a distance. When he finally pushed inside, the connection was so overwhelming that Nathaniel's breath hitched in a series of hitching, silent sobs. The sex was not the polished, distant act Nathaniel had always feared it would be. It was raw, heavy, and filled with the desperate hunger of two people who had spent their lives in isolation. Dante moved with a rhythmic, punishing grace, his body a solid weight that anchored Nathaniel to the earth. Each thrust was a silent vow, a declaration of territory. Nathaniel clung to Dante's broad shoulders, his fingernails digging into the alpha's skin. He was crying freely now, the tears streaming into his hair, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were the silent cries of someone who had spent 26 years in the dark and had finally been pulled into the sun. He buried his face in the crook of Dante's neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of the man who had become his fortress. "Look at me, Nathaniel," Dante commanded, his voice thick with a mix of lust and raw emotion. Nathaniel opened his eyes, his vision blurred by salt. Dante was looking down at him with an expression of such pure, terrifying devotion that it made Nathaniel's heart ache. The Ghost King was gone. There was only a man, scarred and tired, who had fought a war just to have this moment. "I have you," Dante whispered, his pace slowing as he reached for the peak, his forehead pressed against Nathaniel's. "I have you, and I am never letting you go back to that lonely room." As they both shattered, the silent cries turned into a long, shuddering exhale of surrender. Dante collapsed against him, his weight a comforting shroud, his heart beating a frantic rhythm against Nathaniel's own. The scent of them, omega and alpha, cedar and sweet skin, filled the penthouse, weaving together until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. In the quiet aftermath, as the city lights twinkled below like fallen stars, Dante pulled the silk throw over them both. He kissed the fresh, stinging mark on Nathaniel's neck, his thumb wiping away the last of the tears. "Sleep," Dante murmured, his voice a low, protective hum. "The world is quiet now. I've made sure of it." The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the cold, hollow silence Nathaniel had spent his life cultivating. It was thick with the scent of cedarwood and salt, a humid, physical presence that wrapped around them both. Dante didn't pull away. He stayed anchored to Nathaniel, his heavy limbs draped over the omega, as if he were still afraid that letting go would cause the teacher to vanish back into the shadows of the city. Nathaniel's breath came in stuttering hitches, his chest heaving under Dante's weight. The silent cries had subsided into a dull, rhythmic throb in his throat, the physical sensation of the bond settling into his marrow. It was a weight he had feared his entire life, but now that it was there, it felt like the only thing keeping him from floating away. Dante shifted, his large, calloused hand moving upward to cup Nathaniel's jaw. He used his thumb to wipe away the damp trails on Nathaniel's cheeks, his touch uncharacteristically tentative. "You're still crying," Dante murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that resonated against Nathaniel's ribs. Was I too much?" Nathaniel shook his head slowly against the leather of the sofa. He reached up, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the jagged scar on Dante's side, the mark of the night they met. "No, it's just, I've never been anyone's everything before. It's a lot of weight to carry." Dante's eyes softened, the predatory silver replaced by a deep, weary warmth. He leaned down, pressing a lingering kiss to the center of Nathaniel's forehead. "You aren't carrying it alone. That's what the mark is for. The weight is mine now. Your only job is to exist, Nathaniel. To be the reason I come home to this glass tower instead of staying in the dirt." He sat up slightly, pulling the silk throw higher around Nathaniel's shoulders to shield him from the chill of the air conditioning. The powerful big shot, who had dismantled a criminal empire just hours ago, was now meticulously tucking in the corners of a blanket, his focus entirely narrowed down to the comfort of one person. "I have a room prepared for you," Dante said softly. "It doesn't have bars, and the door only locks from the inside. But I'd prefer if you stayed here tonight, in my bed, under my scent. No, scratch that. I don't know how long is forever, but I want you in my hands forever." Nathaniel looked at the man who had drafted him into a war and then built him a sanctuary. He thought of his small studio apartment, the quiet rows of books, and the yellow raincoat hanging by the door. He realized that while that life was safe, it was also empty. "One condition," Nathaniel whispered, reaching out to pull Dante back down to him. Dante paused, his brow arching. Anything. The children, Nathaniel said, a small, tired smile finally touching his lips. I'm not quitting my job. I'm still Mr. Brooks. I keep the blue finger paint and the story hours. Dante let out a short, huffed breath of a laugh, leaning down to nuzzle the crook of Nathaniel's neck, right where the new mark burned with a steady, possessive heat. I expected nothing less, Dante breathed against his skin. I'll have a new car waiting for you on Monday, a subtle one, and the guards stay in the shadows just like you wanted. But from now on, Mr. Brooks, you're coming home to me. Nathaniel closed his eyes, finally letting his body go limp in the alpha's arms. The ghost mark was gone, replaced by a living, breathing reality. He wasn't moving left or right anymore. He had found the center. 3 years later, the Ghost King was a man conquered by a 3-year-old. The Vane estate, once a place of sterile marble and silent shadows, was now a battlefield of plush toys and scattered picture books. The heavy, rhythmic thud of expensive leather shoes echoing down the hallway wasn't the sound of an approaching syndicate execution. It was the sound of a CEO in a 3-piece suit losing a game of tag. Eli, stop. The raincoat is backwards. Dante Vane, a man who had dismantled criminal empires with a single phone call, was currently skidding around the corner of the grand foyer. His silk tie was tossed over his shoulder. His charcoal blazer was unbuttoned and flapping wildly, and his silver-gray eyes were wide with a mixture of exhaustion and adoration. Ahead of him, a miniature blur of yellow plastic and dark curls shrieked with delight. Little Eli, possessing all of his father's stubbornness and his mother's infectious spirit, was sprinting toward the kitchen, his tiny yellow raincoat crinkling loudly with every step. You can't catch me, Big Boss, the toddler giggled, a nickname he'd picked up from the security detail that still watched over them like silent guardian angels. I am the only boss in this house, Elias Vane, Dante roared playfully, lunging forward. He caught the hood of the yellow coat just as Eli reached the rug, scooping the boy up and tucking him under his arm like a football. Eli collapsed into a fit of breathless giggles, kicking his legs as Dante spun him around. I win! I win! You won the moment you were born, you little monster, Dante breathed, his voice dropping into that low, warm baritone that only his family ever heard. He pressed a rough, bearded kiss to Eli's cheek, his nose catching the faint, sweet scent of the boy, a perfect mix of Nathaniel's softness and the grounding cedarwood of the Vane line. Nathaniel stepped into the foyer, leaning against the doorframe with a tray of warm cookies and a look of pure, unadulterated contentment. He watched the man who had once been a ghost, kneeling on the floor in a $2,000 suit, letting a toddler pull at his hair. The raincoat is for outside, Eli, Nathaniel said, though there was no bite to his reprimand. Dante looked up, his gaze locking onto Nathaniel's. In an instant, the frantic energy of the chase settled into something deep and soul-stirring. Dante reached out, his hand finding Nathaniel's ankle and squeezing gently, a silent top-off of the devotion that had only grown stronger over the years. He's fast, Nat, Dante panted, a rare, boyish grin breaking across his face. I think he's been training with the guards. Or he just knows his father can't say no to him, Nathaniel teased, walking over to set the tray down and joining them on the floor. In the warmth of the foyer, with the rain drumming a peaceful rhythm against the glass and the scent of cedarwood wrapping around them like a fortress, Nathaniel leaned his head against Dante's shoulder. The war was a memory, the mark was a bond, and the big shot alpha was finally, officially out of breath. Nathaniel hadn't just found a home. He had created a world where a king could be a father, and a nobody could be the son. The end.